I mean, maybe.
How to do a tutorial. Can you just tell me how to do it? I don't want to... Bro, this is a thesis. I want a tutorial. Okay, you know what? We're just gonna jump into this, give it a go, and hope that it doesn't suck. So one of my viewers requested that I do a tutorial on how I've been making some of these remixes. So I'm going to be doing this as a general overview, I guess. I don't really know how I'm going to go through this. I'm kind of just going to go through it blind and hope that what I'm saying makes sense. Because to be completely honest with you guys, when I'm making these songs, I kind of just do it. I don't think about it. I just do it. So I'll do my best to kind of talk through some of my thought processes when, you know, I'm making these sorts of songs. Now, the first thing that you'd have to do with these kind of remixes is obviously you've got to remake the song from scratch. In the way that I am doing these remixes, they're probably closer to covers over remixes, but the RMX tag is just catchy, is kind of nice, the logo looks nice. So I'm calling them remixes, but they're probably closer to covers for the most part. There are some songs that I would deem closer to a remix, but for the most part, they're just rewritten versions of these songs. Essentially, the way I go about that is I'll pull up the original song on YouTube and I'll hit there's a cogwheel in the bottom right and you can change the playback speed. I essentially slow that right down and bit by bit I'll listen to certain parts of the song. So, you know, I'll start with the lead and I'll write that by listening to it. Sometimes I can do it at full speed because, you know, songs like Stereo Madness, for example, it's, you know, super simple song to write. It's super easy to, you know, wrap your head around what's actually being played. But in, like, for today's example, we're going to be using Jumper. So in this case, you know, it's a bit of a faster song. It uses triplets a lot. So it would have taken me a long time to learn how to play it at full speed. So the way I worked around that was literally just writing the melody in the piano roll. One thing I do want to point out is that the reason I've been able to pump these out so quickly is because back in 2021, I was doing a little passion project just for fun, and I'd already gone through and remade all the main levels in 8-bit form, so using, you know, your 8-bit triangle waves, sawtooth waves, square waves, whatever. And so I had all these sessions ready to go, which meant that I didn't really need to rewrite it again. I could use those sessions I took, and it was just a case of changing the instrumentation and then updating it and changing some of the parts wherever I needed to. So that really came in handy, and it's how I've been able to pump some of these songs out so quickly. Otherwise, you know, each song would be like a couple weeks apart. But, you know, having done that in the past has made this really easy. But to do those 8-bit covers, as I've said, it was literally a case of going in and just listening to the song at a very slow playback to then use my ear to kind of figure out what notes are being played, what the chord progression is, and whatnot. In some cases, there are songs that are quite difficult to try and remake from scratch. So in that case, you know, there's a million piano tutorials of these kinds of songs online. There's plenty of sheet music I can use for reference, the, you know, MIDI files that you can access online. All that does come in handy for parts of the songs that my brain might not be able to comprehend, I guess. Because once we get into the later levels in the series, the songs do become more complex. You know, one example I can think off the top of my mind is Clutterfunk. That is a whole mess that I don't really want to go into because I'm still struggling to remix that one. I think it's the last one. I actually need to work out what I want to do with it because it's just a mess at the moment. But, you know, by the time Clutterfunk has to come out, it should hopefully be in a position where I'm happy with it. So I want to just talk about some of the choices I made. Obviously, in this case, it's specific to jumper, but all these techniques that I'm about to talk about can be used across any remix that you decide to do. So I'll talk you through some of the decisions I've made. The most important thing to start with is layering. Now, layering in a track is super important. You know, you probably see tutorials online, people talking about layering your instruments, layering your lead, layering your chords, all that. And I know you probably get it drilled into you that layering is so crucial to like widening your track and making it sound fuller. But, you know, for the most part, it is dead on like a legitimate thing that you need to consider when writing a track. In this case, I can pull up the channel rack and you can see all the groups of instruments I've got. I haven't gone too thick into the layering for some of these simpler songs. There are songs later down the line that will have like 4 or 5 different synths just for the lead melody. This song in particular, I've used 4 for the lead melody, because there's 2 that are used later in the song that I've added later on. But 2 for the main melody, 2 for the arpeggiated chords, your percussion instruments and whatnot. These 2 down here are the other 2 lead melody synths that are used in the later half of the track. Just some maintenance things to get out of the way. I find it really helpful to put markers on my track to know where each part is. Every song is different and it really doesn't matter how you mark it, as long as it works for you and you know what each section means. That's all that matters. So in this case, we've got the intro, which in terms of the level is obviously from the start of the level up until the first ship section in the level. And from there, it goes from that ship section all the way to the next ship section, which I've deemed a breakdown in this remix, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. But the breakdown where you're flying through the ship and you've got, you know, the block and the triangle obstacles that you kind of got to fly through like a minefield kind of thing. And then after that section, you're then in the final stretch of the level, and you know, that's what I consider the last part. So there's 4 parts to this song, and I want to go through each part, you know, some more briefly than others, but I want to talk through each 4 parts. Again, this applies to any song you decide to remix. We're just using Jumper as this example. So to start with the introduction, we've got 16 bars of introduction. So that includes obviously the start of the level, the first gravity change where you start jumping upside down, and then everything up until the first ship portal, you know, using the gameplay as a visual cue, I guess. So in this case, this is what this part sounds like in this particular point in time. A lot of these remixes are 1-for-1. They're pretty faithful in terms of, I suppose, the literal notes used. For the most part, there are some instances where I've made creative changes that I think benefit the song in terms of the notes that are used. But they only apply to specific songs in my case. You usually keep these remixes 1-for-1. You don't stray too far from what the song is trying to accomplish. I want to talk about some of the effects that I've used and how I've created this idea in the intro where it feels all closed in, and then as the song begins, it then releases and brings you into the main part of the song. A lot of the remixes that I've done, you'll notice this, but I've done what is called a filter sweep. Essentially what that is, if I pull up the actual EQ itself that I've used, you can see that all this high-end energy here will come through the mix, and you can see it in the waveform. But as we progress to later down the track, you can see that this automation curve moves where this filter sweep sits in the EQ. So you can see it start to move down and open up, bringing the low end in. Some other things that I just want to bring up briefly that you'll notice across the whole track is that we've got these actual audio clips here. I use a lot of the Ultrasonic sample packs for a lot of the remixes I do. I love the stuff that they use. I will leave a link to the Ultrasonic YouTube channel in the description. If you're ever looking into a sample pack for electronic music of any kind, I love their stuff, particularly the progressive house and deep house sample packs. They're two that I use more than any other sample pack that I have, because the stuff that they have is so crisp, so clean, it's easy to manipulate, and I just love using it. Not only, obviously, the percussion and your effects, but some of the synths that come with it too are just top notch, and I love using them. Overall, the intro is very simple, and for most remixes you want that to be the case. You want to introduce the idea in your intro. So without getting too involved, that's kind of what I've done here by using that filter sweep to hold all the energy in and then releasing it into the main part, as well as keeping the overall sound very simple. Not too much layering, not too much in your face. We leave that for the main part of the song. The next section, which is obviously the main bulk of the song. This is probably going to be brief because I don't want to go, there's not really much to go into, I guess. Following the same trend of still staying faithful to the song, we're bringing that energy in, and really the main technique that I've used here to bring that to life is the layering. As well as you can see down the bottom here, we've added a sub layer, which is just playing the root notes. That's to hit your, very low frequencies that most synths can't hit on their own. Your subs, when maintained right, really help build the mix and fill in those lower end gaps that you have that your harmonies and your chords can't really fill. You can see that I haven't changed too much in terms of the up itself. This section here is from the intro. What I've highlighted is from the main part. So it's mostly the same. The difference this time is that I've added another synth that plays the octave up. In this part, I don't know why it's there. It shouldn't be there because I've taken it out, but it's not there. But I've added a second arpeggio with a different synth that sits just above, an octave above the main one. So if I should be able to just mute that. And then so you can hear that's the first synth, and then we go to the second one, which you can see is an octave up. And then together they obviously create a wider sound. The main section is pretty straightforward. We bring in the kick instruments, we bring in the snare instruments, bring in the hats. We have the main rhythm of the track. I'm going to leave the breakdown to last because I want to discuss how I've constructed the breakdown, because what you hear in this breakdown section, you don't hear in the original song. And this is where the creative aspect of a remix then comes into play, and that's when you can decide to change up the way the song is written to benefit obviously the remix and differ it enough from the original that you can call it a remix. So for now, we're just going to skip to the final section. This is pretty similar to the main bulk of the song, where it's straightforward and just meant to replicate what the original song is. The only difference this time, and this is usually to build up the impact of the song, is I'll usually go and change some of the percussion. The easiest way to do that is with your hi-hats. I find that by introducing a faster rhythm, it creates more energy in the track. In this case, I've basically put the hi-hats on every triplet in the rhythm of the track. So you can hear it. If I put the metronome on, kind of has a swing rhythm. And I think my FL's crashed. Well, guess we just gotta listen to this for a while until we go crazy, because my FL Studio just decided to crash and I cannot pause it. Alright, back to what I was saying. Sorry about that. Hi-hats basically have this faster rhythm that essentially creates more energy in the track, and it allows you to kind of bounce with the rhythm, I guess, in this case. So this hi-hat pattern, this first one here, is what's used in the main duration of the song. This second hi-hat pattern is what's used in the final part of the song. So it's got like it's kind of got a swing rhythm to it, and then listen to the second pattern. It's more straightforward. It's taking some of those gaps and pauses that were in the original pattern and keeping a consistent rhythm that brings more energy into the track and feels like you're moving faster. Because you're reaching the climax of the level, you want to create that energy, and I find the best way to do that is by manipulating the hi-hat rhythms. Alright, the last thing I want to cover quickly, and this section's kind of going to cover, I suppose, where you can get creative in your tracks. So the breakdown for this section, this is the part where you're flying through with the ship and you've got the spiked obstacles. So that's, this section. That part of the song. Now, if you have a look at the section, you can see that I've chopped up the arpeggio slightly. Now, doing this changes this part of the song from just part of the song and feeling really static to a breakdown before bringing it back into the song as a whole. There isn't really a simple way to explain why I've done this. It's a creative decision that I decided would benefit the song, because if I were to leave this section just as it was and let arpeggio go through, basically from bar 17 here till the end, it'll feel very static to me, and the only thing that's really changing is the lead itself, which to me, nothing against nothing against Waterflame and the original song. The original song is good regardless, but in terms of a remix, it's very static, and that's where it becomes more of a cover than a remix. So while it's only a short section that I've decided to change, I feel like having this breakdown section here really emphasizes the point here that you've slowed down a bit here and you've contained all your energy again to then release it for one final dance kind of thing, I've gone and pulled off to the side what the original structure, I guess, looked like before I went and made my changes. So you can see on the left side here, we have the original rhythm that's got the lead, the arpeggio in its full, the original hats, kick and snare. Obviously, you've got your effects and the second layer of kicks for whatever reason. And you've got your subs. So the original part sounds like this. Straightforward. It doesn't sound bad by any means. Like, if anything, it's actually really, well put together. But I think for me, when listening to it, the part in particular didn't stand out to me. in a musical sense. Obviously, it does stand out because when I hear this section, I think, oh, I'm flying through a minefield with spikes everywhere. But in a musical sense, it didn't stand out to me, so I needed to change it. And I thought the best way to do it was change it from just a new section into a breakdown before the final. So to do that, and the best way that I find to do that, is by emphasizing your silences, because sometimes when you're writing songs, silence is the loudest instrument that you have, and if you utilize it well and utilize it rhythmically, it can leave a really big impact. So how I've done it in this case is I started by creating the rhythmic pattern with the kick drum and synced it up to the main melody. And then, as you can see, the kicks, if you look at the pattern here, the kicks then get faster as like a mini build-up, I guess, to bring you back into the main song. Once I got that pattern done, I essentially then chopped up the arpeggio to match the kicks. The hats and snare I've kept the same for the most part. The hats I've synced with its own like section that kind of adds to the drop where the hats speed up. But the snare itself, all I've done is I've taken out the first 4 bars of this section and then reintroduced the snares in the second half. And what I did with the arpeggio as well, I also did with the sub. Exactly the same, except at the very last bar of this breakdown, I've just brought the sub back in and let it play that whole note right through till the end. You'll see that in the remixed rhythm that I've got, there is a EQ automation. Now this EQ automation is the exact same one that I had used with the intro. The only difference this time is we're starting on full, we're closing it back up, and then we're releasing it. And I find that doing this is just another way to help contain that energy, bring that tension in, and then release it in one final go. So what I'm going to do for you now is I'm going to play the original rhythm, so the unedited, literally just the synths that I've used for the song played, and then I'm going to play the remixed rhythm on its own, and I guess you guys can decide what sounds better. I know what it is to me, because what it is to me ends up in the final song. One thing I do want to bring up very quickly is one of the plugins that I've used across the instruments, which is Nicky Romero's Kickstart. I'll bring it up on the screen. That way you guys can see it. So this plugin here, it is the only plugin that I've used on my FX chains that I've had to pay for. Kickstart isn't very expensive. Obviously, I know some people may not be able to buy plugins or anything like that, but if you plan on making these remixes, and particularly any sort of EDM and house music, for beginners, this is a must, because it makes it so easy to add sidechain compression into your tracks without having to do all the routing yourself and whatnot. Anything that plays during this empty space up here will be ducked in volume, and it'll create this pulsing effect that, in this case here, it syncs to the beats of the project. So every 4 beats, every beat of a bar, it'll duck the volume at the very start of the beat. The easiest way is to just sync it if you're doing a track that's 4 to the floor, kick drum on every beat. The other way you can do it as well, which I find works very well with certain songs, is you can sync another audio source to be the, I suppose, the key to when a duck needs to happen. So what you'd do is you'd route your kick drum, so whatever channel it's on, you'd route your kick drum to this plugin, and then that plugin then activates whenever it hears a kick drum. So if I hit play, you can see that the audio waveform is going through. Now I've got the mix set very low so that it doesn't duck it all the way down, but it ducks it down enough that the kick can still come through when it needs to. You can see that when I hit play, see it coming through. Now if I turn it right up, you can see the white line is what's coming through, and the grey in the background is what isn't coming through, and what the waveform is itself. But if I turn it down, so it creates this pulsating effect, and it is really handy for beginners. If you're an experienced musician, you are better off just doing sidechain compression yourself, because in the long run, the quality is just better when you do it manually. But for quick little things like this, I do like using Kickstart too, because it gets one thing out of the way that I don't really have to worry about. And with the audio sync of Kickstart too, it makes it so much easier to sidechain to a kick drum rather than just to the rhythm of the project. One thing I do want to point out too is at the end here, this top automation that I've got here is for Kickstart, and you can see that it's a mute or solo. In this case, it is a mute switch, and I've got it that it switches off right at the end here. And that is for the reason that the kick drum disappears in the last 2 bars, or last 3 bars technically, of the song. And you'll see what I mean. If I turn everything back on, you'll hear that during this part here, it's ducking like normal. But once we're at the end of the song where you have the snare roll build up, there's no kick drum that needs to come through. So there's no point to have Kickstart on. So we've switched it off, and that allows the lead melody to come through right up until the end of the song. So, yeah, as a whole, you know, this is a very simple song to cover. Obviously, the breakdown had the most that I needed to talk about. It's kind of, I hope that this tutorial wasn't too convoluted. Again, like I said at the very beginning, with a lot of these remixes, I don't usually think about it too much. I just kind of do it at this point. But I do still have some thought processes when I'm going about it. So I'm hoping that kind of clarifies that up when it comes to the remixes. So I hope this tutorial kind of helped talk through how I make these videos, how I make the songs themselves and whatnot. I know it might have been a bit convoluted. I'm hoping that when I cut this video down, it's not too bad. So I'm hoping it's somewhat made sense to you guys. Look forward to Jumper. If you want to view that, the video will be somewhere. I'll put a link up to it now. Look forward to the future songs. Time Machine is almost done, and I'll be preparing it by the time this video is out. I'll be getting it ready to release, as well as obviously the rest of the main levels and some bonuses along the way. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.